What's up, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide. There's been a trending term over the last several years out here on Lake Fork when it comes to structure, and that is shell bed. Today we're going to break down what exactly is a shell bed and how to capitalize and catch these legendary giant bass on Lake Fork fishing them. Like I said, over the last few years, man, this has really been a trending term, and really this term was talked about, you know, by the locals, or some of the guides talked about shell beds for a long time. Mark Page used to talk about, a lot of guys have talked about shell beds for a long time. But as far as the mass public really talking about shell beds being the structure on Lake Fork, it really kind of started several years back when Mike McFarland and myself were making several videos together, and Mike was very adamant about the shell bed deal, and I was on board with that because I knew that type of structure was working. Now, as always with Mike, nothing against him. I mean, I love the guy to death. Me and him don't see things the same way when it comes to fishing. We have totally different styles of fishing, and that's fine. That's common even on the top level of the tours. Guys don't always see things the same way or agree, and he probably has some differing thoughts than me on these structures known as shell beds. And so I'm going to break down what I think. Now, this doesn't mean what I'm saying is the holy grail by any means. There's always say no absolutes in fishing, so all respect to Mike and what he thinks about these things and talks about. I'm not trying to contradict him in that kind of a way. I'm just telling you guys what my thought process is about what these things are made of, how they're made, and how to fish them the best way, in my opinion. So essentially, shell beds are shallow, hard spots. Well, they do exist in all depths. The shell beds do exist in all depths, but the ones that people talk about the most, especially during the springtime, March, April, May, man, they're talking about these shallow extending points that run way out into the lake. Okay, that's what they're talking about. So we have a unique situation right now at Lake Fork where the lake's been 5 to 6 foot low for the last year or more, and so we've been able to actually go out and see these shallow points because we typically are fishing these shallow points in 2 to 3 foot of water. Well, that's well out of the water right now with the lake being as low as it is. So we've been able to actually walk around on some of these points and really check out what these points are made of, what's on them, what are the features of these structures that we catch so many big fish off of, because guys, this is the pattern, like the ultimate home run pattern. The deal that Lee Livesey caught 42 pounds on Championship Sunday out here a couple years ago, that's these structures. That's what every guy that was in the top, pretty much, except for I think Austin Felix was sight fishing. I think everybody else was pretty much fishing those shallow points, shell beds, the stuff we're talking about today. So let's take a little walk out on these shell beds. Let's look at some drone footage and then take a little walk out on one of these shell beds and show you guys exactly what these things are made of. So it's pretty difficult to see because of all the growth that's come up. You can see that big chunk rock right there. And rock, there's rock in the growth on here, rock over there, rock. And here's some shells. There are little, shells, so those are mixed in. But rock, I mean, it's, as you guys can see, it's mostly rock on top of this, right? Some shells. But a lot of rock. Big chunks of rock like that right there. Well, by our standards in East Texas, that's a big chunk of rock. So when you're fishing a spot and you wonder why some parts feel smooth, okay, and some parts feel hard and crunchy or rough or whatever, you can look right here. From here to there, it's all sand, just sand, clay and sand. And we get right here, you've got some shell mixed in with some gravel, mixed in with some bigger chunks of rock. So that's what we're actually fishing on the bottom. So from the drone footage that we're looking at now, you can see that these points extend way out into the lake, man. They really run a long way out into the lake, and they have some different features on them. They're gonna have clay, they're gonna have sand, they're gonna have rock, and yes, they're gonna have some shell on most every one of them, some of them more so than others, okay? But what I have found through looking through the lake at all these points is mostly what's on these points is rock, not shell. There's a lot more rock exposed on these points than I ever would have thought before the lake got low, and I really took the time to look around at them over this past year. As you see this point right here that we're looking at, that's the island with the point now extending off it that you can see exposed. That's where Lee caught most of the 42 pounds on that championship Sunday, that legendary day. He started the day there, caught most of his weight there, went and caught another big fish on another point across the lake, then came back and capitalized and got up to that 42-pound mark on that same point extending off this island that we're looking at right now. We're seeing the dry land where Lee was fishing on. Lee was fishing on this dry land section that we're looking at right now. What's interesting, if you look out to the end of that point, you see that house foundation sitting out there. Another feature that is on one of these points, and it's not the only one that has something like that. There's road beds at times that cross some of these shallow points out here. So there's all kinds of unique structure. It's not just about shell. And what I want you guys to take away from this is, yes, the shell is there for a reason, and the shell does create some hard packed in spots on these points, but the shell is not necessarily, in my opinion, the end all to be all. It's really just about finding a shallow, hard spot. So let me explain to you why shell gets on these shallow points in the first place. It's about plankton condensing. That's what it's about. If you've got this much water, 30 feet of water, there's plankton scattered all throughout it. As that water, that wind blows that water up over that point, all that plankton in that water column gets condensed on top of that point. That's why shell tends to gather there, because what does shell feed on? Shell feeds on plankton. What do bait fish feed on? Bait fish feed on plankton. So wherever the shell tends to gather, because the plankton condenses, the bait fish also tend to gather because the plankton condenses, and that starts the whole food chain, and you can kind of see the picture from there. So most every time that you're fishing structure on Lake Fork, you are looking for plankton condensing. That's what you're chasing. You're chasing plankton more so than anything else, whether you know it or not. So it's kind of an interesting factor. Now, what's also interesting to me is if you walk around the woods in this area around here in Northeast Texas, especially right here around Lake Fork, you're not going to see rock. Like, it's pretty rare for you to walk through the woods and walk up on some exposed rock. So what does that tell us about all the exposed rock that's in Lake Fork? It didn't exist before the lake was built, because there's not any in the woods around here to speak of. I mean, there's some here and there, but not very much, right? So the amount of rock that we see on these points now didn't exist or wasn't exposed before the lake was built. So what that tells me, there's been a lot of condensed current going over that spot, wherever the rock is showing up at. There had to have been water rushing over that at a condensed rate to create increased water pressure to expose that rock and create that hard bottom, create that exposed hard clay, create that exposed rock. That had to happen. Well, if that water pressure is condensing enough and pushing over that dirt and silt to clean it off and make it hard and expose the rock, it's also probably condensing plankton in those same areas. So whether you're finding shell, whether you're finding rock, what you have found is an area where the water current condenses, and that condenses the plankton, and that gathers the bait fish, and that starts the whole scenario. When the wind blows the right direction, that's why those points are so important. It's also another reason that you hear people say when they're fishing the shallow points or the shell beds, man, the wind, you gotta go fish the ones the wind's blowing on. You don't want to fish the ones the wind's blowing away from. That's a bad deal. You want to fish the one the wind's blowing right into is really the best way to fish those shallow points and shell beds. Now, how do we fish these shallow points? That's important. And boat position can be of the utmost importance when you're fishing shell beds and shallow points. I hesitate to say shell beds, because there's shell beds in deeper water as well that you do not have to fish the same way. You don't set your boat up the same way. So specifically right now, for the pattern that's coming up, that's about to start any day now, and will carry us through the spring, we're talking about shallow points. Boat position is so important. You've really got to think about, how are those fish likely to travel onto that point and off of that point? Now, fish are kind of dumb, and they'll do things for no reason, so there's no hard rule on this as well. Those fish can pull up on that point from any angle, but in my mind, I always think that the way the fish are most likely to pull up on that point is either going to be where the point extends out at the tip, they're going to come right up the ridge from the tip, or where the saddle is and that little deep part is, they're going to come straight up from that deep part onto the shallowest part of it. So I'm thinking if you got a point shaped like this and the deepest little drop off on it's right here in this corner, you're either gonna come from that deep corner or most likely probably come right up that ridge is probably how those fish are going to travel. For that reason, when I've got a point shaped like this, I want my boat to set off to the side of it, kind of like the boat that we saw in the drone footage. Like if there was water over that point, that's where I'd want my boat sitting, making long casts up over the top of that point. And in fact, if you know that point structure and you go back and review the footage of Lee on that exact point in the Bassmaster Elite Series, catching that 42 pounds, his boat is sitting exactly where I'm talking about, kind of in the middle of the point, off the side of it, throwing across it, letting those fish come and go as they want up and down that ridge. And he can fan cast to the whole top side peak of that ridge where those fish are most likely to be ambushing shad at, and where that plankton is going to be getting the most condensed at on the shallowest part of that ridge. So that's why I like my boat position to be there. And that's probably the most important factor of how to fish these points, is setting your boat up without interrupting those fish's travel, letting them come and go, where you can sit in one spot and let those fish come to you and lean on their heads, guys. It can be unbelievable. If you saw that Bassmaster footage from the 42 pounds, guys, that happens out here not every day. Obviously it's 42 pounds, but it happens a lot more than you might think. Like and especially the 30 and 35 pounds, it happens a lot every single year out here on these exact structures. Baits that you want to use, you know, big swim baits have been popular on that deal for a long time. Line through big swim baits are the most popular on that deal because they ride real high in the water column and you can fish them real slow and they'll stay right at the top of the water column over those shallow points. Line through swim baits work phenomenal. My personal favorite line through swim bait for Lake Fork is the Smash Tech Felon. It's a really, really good one. But there's many line throughs out there that'll work very well over these points. Another bait that works really good and is real popular is a square bill. Square bills are probably the second most popular bait to throw over those points. A shad colored square bill can work really well as well. Another bait though that works really well that doesn't really get talked about nearly as much is going to be a jerk bait. Now Brandon Cobb exposed us to this a little bit in the 2019 Bassmaster Elite Series, and if I'm being completely honest with you, I never thought about throwing a jerk bait on a 2-foot deep point in May until I saw Brandon Cobb do it. But since he showed me that, I've done it myself, and those jerk baits work extremely well all the way from right now, January and February. If you get the warm trending weather, sunny days, and those fish pull up, you can catch them on a jerk bait on those points right now, all the way through May. A jerk bait can work really well, and don't worry about that jerk bait hitting the bottom. It's gonna bang around in that clay. It's no different than a crankbait, a square bill deflecting off that stuff. That jerk bait hits it and bounces, however it does. Those wild, erratic deflections are gonna get you more bites and bigger bites anyway, so don't worry about the fact that your jerk bait is banging into the bottom when you're fishing it over these shallow points. It's a really good top secret guide trick tool. Last but not least, one of the most easy ways to fish these points, and a lot of times the most effective way to just get bites on them, is a Carolina rig. And my favorite bait to throw on a Carolina rig on these shallow points is going to be the full-size Zoom brush hog, the big one. Don't get that baby one. Don't waste your time on the little one. You can throw the little one and get bites, but man, throw that big one. There's big fish pulling up on these points, and you know what? I've had no problem with 2-pounders eating a full-size brush hog. So get that full-size brush hog on a Carolina rig or even a lizard, something like that, and throw that thing across that point. And if you do that on windy shallow points and you fish enough of them this spring, you will have a day where you will catch a 30-pound bag. I mean, it doesn't happen every day, and you got to hit the right points at the right time with the wind and the fish present. But man, when you hit it, you can catch a 30-pound bag on one point in about 10 minutes when it's just right. So, and last but certainly not least for the baits on these shallow points, as the water gets warmer, this is more of an April and May deal. You probably won't get as much of this in February for sure, and probably not even in March very much, but in April and May, those big topwater baits, and I'm talking about the big Super Spook, in fact, the one that Lee threw was the Zara Spook, Super Spook saltwater version, was the one Lee was throwing. But the big Super Spooks, those are pretty special on these points, guys. They will catch a big old fish in a hurry and catch a bunch of them. And man, I mean, who doesn't like watching 8-pounders blow up on topwater baits, right? And that's what you get. So that's the other bait that's really, really good on this pattern. Y'all go check that out, man. Try that this spring. hopefully this helps you have a little more understanding of what we're looking at under the water and what we're fishing. You know, these ones we showed you today are out of the water, but there are plenty of those points that are in the right depth right now on this lake that extend out from, you know, now that we're 5 foot low, they would normally be 5 foot to 8 foot, but now they're 0 foot to 3 foot. Those points exist out here on the lake, even though the lake is low. In fact, there might even be more of them now with the lake being low, okay? Because as the lake gets lower, the points get flatter, just in general as a whole. So there might be even more of these type of areas to fish than there is when the lake's full. So it's gonna be a good pattern for you. Hope you guys have good luck on it this spring. Hope this video helped you in some kind of way. If nothing else, I hope it entertained you and kept you busy for a little while, man. Thank you guys so much for watching as always. We'll see you next time right here on your Lake Fork Guide.